All right, yes, let's get started. Thank you very much for coming to this session on artificial intelligence. So let me just say briefly what we're going to do and then introduce our first speaker. So what we're going to do is we have three speakers in this session. The first is Toby Walsh, and he'll be speaking for 30 minutes, followed up with Sean O'Hegarty. And we'll have brief Q&As after these talks. But if you do not get to a question that you'd like to ask during that brief Q&A, we will have a general discussion at the very end of 45 minutes, so please hold on to your questions. And then we'll have a brief break of 30 minutes, and following that, our last talk by Victoria Krakovna. So our first speaker is Toby Walsh. He's a leading researcher in artificial intelligence, currently a guest professor at Technical University in Berlin, and a professor of artificial intelligence at the University of New South Wales. He's been elected a fellow of the Australian Academy of Science and the Association for the Advancement of Artificial Intelligence, and has won a Humboldt Research Award. And he plays a leading role in UN negotiations on lethal autonomous weapons, including negotiations that will be happening this week.
Yes.
What I'm understanding. So today he'll be talking about the limits of AI. Please join me in welcoming Toby Walsh.
Thank you very much. So it's a great time to be an AI practitioner, researcher working in AI, because it used to be when I started 20 or 30 years back, people said, oh, you're never going to succeed. And now people can say, you're going to succeed. People are worried that we might succeed. And there have been some landmark, by most people's reckoning, moments. Earlier this year in March, we had, there's not unfortunately a UK flag on there, but it's a great success for Britain after all, where Google's DeepMind beat Lee Sedol at the ancient Chinese board game of Go. And that is the Mount Everest of board games, much more challenging from an AI perspective than a game like chess. But I think people get a little carried away in the euphoria about this success, and I just want to put some little perspective on how that was. All respect to DeepMind and the Google team for what they achieved, but just to give you some context for how difficult that problem was, Remy Coulon had written the best Go playing program prior to AlphaGo, a program called Crazy Stone, played at a decent amateur level. It would beat me, I'm a terrible Go player. But back in March 2014, he said, it's going to be 10 years before we get to be able to play at close to a professional level. So it was quite nice to wake up 2 years later, when AlphaGo beats Lee Sedol, probably one of the best Go players in the world. But you have to put this in perspective. He said 10 years, it only took 2 years. But Google threw a huge amount of engineering effort at that problem. Our Go programs were the product of individuals, people like Remy himself. It was a rather minority aspect of AI. Not many people were putting that much effort in it. So Google had definitely increased the ante. And so perhaps it wasn't so surprising if you put that much more in a Manhattan-like project way. You throw that much more resources to a problem, you're going to succeed that much quicker. And it's also worth pointing out, because people think, well, Go, I play Go terribly. And maybe you don't play Go very well either. People think, well, this program can play Go very well. What else can it do? It can do nothing else than play Go. It is, like almost all the endeavors that we've ever done in AI today, and likely for quite a bit in the future, an idiot savant. To program it to play anything else than Go would take months, years even, of effort, even to make it play chess. You couldn't just say, okay, now I'll show it some games of chess. It will start programming. It will start playing chess. It would still take a significant engineering effort for it to play chess. So there's no chance it's going to wake up tomorrow and say, look, humanity, you're no good at Go. I'm going to make some money at online poker. Or, as some people might have you think, humanity, I'm going to take over the planet next, now that I've beaten you at Go. So what might the limits of AI be? It's a scientific field. we're interested in where this might all end up. I like to think of a sort of historical analogy. Could the Wright brothers, when they flew that first couple of 100 feet, the width of the 747's wingspan or so, could they have predicted where this was going to all end up and what technological limits they might run into? And there are technological limits. I mean, we can't. We've discovered that it's rather expensive and economically unviable to fly supersonic. There were limits to be found, even when they flew that first couple of 100 feet. Now, one of the very seductive ideas that many people have focused on is that at some point we're going to build a machine and it will be able to improve itself. And then that's going to be some sort of tipping point. The machine will soon far exceed our own intelligence. And then it's game over for humanity, because we're no longer the smartest things on the planet anymore. And we got to become the dominant species because we were the smartest. It's in our name, Homo sapiens. It's so central to our existence, our position on the planet, that, of course, this is going to be an incredibly transformative moment. And, of course, people typically call this the technological singularity. A number of authors have talked about this. I just want to throw a couple of things into the mix here to suggest that, like many practitioners of AI, it's not clear to me that this is as inevitable as some people would make you believe. Here's a quote from Nick Bostrom: "Human-level intelligence, artificial intelligence, leads quickly to greater than human-level intelligence." Now, there's actually a huge number of assumptions in that claim. And I want to pick up a few of those, not to suggest that there aren't ultimately some existential risks that we should worry about. But the existential risk that suddenly we're going to wake up one morning and overnight or very rapidly the machines have got away from us is perhaps rather less likely than likely. But we will still have to worry about things like problems that people will talk about, I'm sure, during the rest of today and the rest of this week. Things like value alignment. Even if we don't wake up and machines have magically got there to become more intelligent than us by themselves without our assistance, we still will have to worry about some of these problems that I'm sure will be talked about later today, like value alignment, whether their values are aligned properly with ours. But perhaps it won't happen too quickly, and therefore perhaps we will have time to make sure we get it right. Okay, so I'm going to give you 6 reasons, I only got 5 fingers, why this won't necessarily happen. The first one is an argument that goes under the name of the faster thinking dog. Steven Pinker puts this much more eloquently than I've ever put it, but that one of the ideas, one of the beauties of working in AI is that we've got computers, we've got silicon, not biology there, and Moore's law has given us faster computers, more memory, we can do more data. The clock speeds are going up slowly these days, but at any rate, we won't have those biological limitations. Now, the argument that may not be enough, certainly to get us to superintelligence, is that my dog, if I could make him magically think faster, he's still going to be a dog. He's still going to do all the things that dogs do. It's likely he doesn't have the right mental constructs, the right parts of the brain to do anything other than be a dog. And it doesn't matter if I make him think faster, he will still be a dog. So the fact that our computers may be faster, may have more memory, may not be enough. Intelligence is far more than just speed and memory. It's about experience and learning. It's a very multifaceted thing that we poorly define, but nevertheless, it's not clear that just turning up the clock speed or giving more memory is going to get you anywhere. Okay, the second argument, and that was in the Bostrom quote I began with, which is that there's something incredibly self-focusing, anthropocentric about saying that passing human-level intelligence is the tipping point. There could be a tipping point, but there's no obvious reason to me why that is human-level intelligence. Well, first of all, what does human-level intelligence mean? There's a spectrum of intelligences in this room, so do we mean the smartest person that's ever existed, or the average collective human intelligence, or there's a distribution of intelligences that you've got to pass, but suppose we pass that distribution in some way. Why is that the tipping point? There's no necessary, there may well be a tipping point where you've got to enough intelligence to be able to recursively self-improve. But it's elevating ourselves as we usually do in most of the history of science to be a much more special point than we ever have been. Copernicus taught us this, Darwin taught us this, and perhaps the study of AI will help teach us that our intelligence is perhaps not something so inherently special. We just happen to be the most intelligent people around, and passing that intelligence may not be the tipping point. There may well be a tipping point, but it could be so far past our intelligence that we could never build machines that would have that intelligence. Okay, the third argument is one that, well, we haven't really defined what intelligence is. And I carefully didn't because it's an impossible rabbit hole to go down. But this argument does confuse two quite distinct things, which is about learning about a task and learning about tasks in general. So, take AlphaGo again. AlphaGo learned how to play Go. That's how it got to be better than any humans at Go. But in doing that, in playing the billions of games of Go that it used to learn to play Go better, it didn't learn how to learn any faster. It's still one of the slowest learners that we know. And actually, there's a beautiful observation that can be made about that game, which was lost on many commentators, was that although humankind, well, Lisa Daw, for the representing humankind, lost 4-1, it was a great victory for human learning. Because AlphaGo was playing a new style of Go. It played moves of Go that Go masters had, especially in the beginning of the game, Go masters had never seen before. And yet, it took billions of games of Go to learn how to play its Go, but Lisa Daw took 3 games of Go, and on the 4th game, he'd learned how to beat it. Because we're really quick learners. We have to be. It's baked into our DNA. It's baked into our evolution. If you're being chased by a tiger, you can't be a slow learner. And we still can't build programs that can learn with the speed that we can. We still have a long, long, long way to go to be able to do that. If you started playing Go the moment you were born, and you only ever played Go, you would never have played as many games of Go as AlphaGo did. In fact, if the whole room only played Go the whole of their lives, you collectively would not have played as many games of Go. So that gives you a perspective of how slow the machines are still at learning. The fourth argument is one that most of us in many other areas of science are used to, which is that we could easily have recursive self-improvement, but hit into diminishing returns. We have many examples of this. This is, suppose every generation of machines, they get 50% more intelligent, whatever that means, each time. You would still only, after an infinite number of steps of improvement, have doubled the intelligence. And frequently, that's the experience of many people like myself working in AI. We build systems and we run into these diminishing returns. Performance tops out at some point. We get better and better, but the steps get smaller and smaller, and eventually you run into some bottleneck. The fifth argument is that there may be just some fundamental limits of intelligence. We don't know enough about intelligence to know. Certainly, if you are thinking about quality of decision-making in an uncertain world, there are fundamental limits. You can't go into the casino with a smarter program and play blackjack any better than a good mathematician. Doesn't matter how smart you make the program, there's a limit to the quality of decisions you can make, which just are the laws of probability. And once you have a good understanding of laws of probability, you can make the optimal decisions. And so there are fundamental limits to how good quality decisions you can, certainly when nature's an opponent. And then the sixth argument, which is that we've been rather seduced as a culture by exponentials. There's some meme out there that exponentials will get us out of any problem. But that's not true. There are many mathematical functions and there are many computational problems we know about that an exponential improvement is not going to help you at all. That the problem, the complexity, in a formal sense, the complexity grows super exponentially or may even be undecidable. So we may, unless we have different models of computation, and even quantum computing is not going to get us out of this one, we may just run into some fundamental bottlenecks that we know about from theoretical computer science. So my conclusion, and one that's actually, I think, suspects shared by many of my colleagues who are trying to build AI systems themselves, is that we won't probably have a technological singularity. That doesn't mean, I don't believe, by 2050 or whenever, or at the turn of the next century, that we won't have intelligent machines and perhaps even super intelligent machines. But that just it's not going to happen overnight, magically, the machines just getting better themselves. But it's going to be like most of our scientific and engineering enterprises, which is just going to take hard sweat and painful application by us to get there. And then we'll have to do the programming, much of the programming ourselves, even if they learn from experiences. That doesn't mean, so I've got a few more minutes before I can run into the Q&A, that we shouldn't think about limiting AI ourselves. And I do think there are some really fundamental issues, very, very immediate, that face our society today that we should be thinking about. And so I just want to spend the second half going through these. The first thing is, actually, the thing that worries that keeps me awake mostly at night is not smart AI, the AI becoming too smart, but the fact that the AI is too stupid. Many of the problems will disappear if the AI was smarter. Of course, that doesn't, there's still problems like value alignment that we'd have to deal if we had smarter AI. But many of the problems we face very immediately today and in the very near future are about the fact that we're giving responsibility to stupid AI. The other point I always like to make is that people blame AI. It's not actually AI, it's the fact that we're giving autonomy to machines, the ability to act in the real world. It's not their intelligence the problem, it's the fact that they're being given the right to act in the real world. That's why there's a picture here of an autonomous car. The autonomous cars we have today are stupid. They're very smart GPS with some reasonably smart cameras built into them, but they're not smart enough to be making the decisions that we're giving them, the life or death decisions that we're giving them when they come to intersections and so on. And there's a moral imperative to get there. The million people that will die in road traffic accidents around the world in the next year, that's the moral imperative. And they will transform our societies in many ways. And I don't think we're going there in a responsible way. Despite the fact that there's a moral imperative, we are not going there in a morally responsible way. And there are certainly companies, and I will name one explicitly here, Tesla, who I believe these days are behaving in very cavalier ways that is actually potentially harmful to the good things that we can do with AI. So in May this year, the news broke that Joshua Brown died in the first accident of a Tesla car when it was on autopilot. Actually, it turns out it was possibly an earlier accident in China, so he may not have even been the first person. So there was a lot of hoo-ha about this, the first person killed by an autonomous car. Tesla responded by putting out press releases saying that people's lives were saved when they had some stroke or something like this, and they were driven by the car on autopilot to hospital. At this point, I think the world is going mad. We are now deciding public safety by press release. This is not a responsible way that technologies should be developed and trialed by whose press release is most convincing. And I don't think we should be allowing Silicon Valley to beta test their product on the public. If these were drug companies beta testing their drugs on the general public who have not signed up, not like Joshua Brown, but the rest of us who are walking on those streets where the Tesla cars are driving, who have not agreed and consented to any of this, we would be very upset. And yet somehow we're allowing Silicon Valley companies to update their software every night with no guarantees as to what the software is going to do, how it's going to interact. I think this is incredible. I think government is letting us down in these sorts of areas. And a third important point, Teslas do not have LiDAR, the laser interferometry-like radar used to pick out three-dimensional views in front of them. My colleagues who build autonomous cars in academia would never build an autonomous car without LiDAR. It's such a useful sensor, it's such useful information you can't get from cameras or GPS, and the only reason it's not in a Tesla is because it's too expensive. So public safety is being decided by what Tesla thinks is cost-effective to put in their car. Again, I think that's just morally not right at all. A couple other things about what we might think about limiting AI ourselves before I finish. As was mentioned in the introduction, I have become an accidental activist. I helped put together an open letter calling upon the United Nations to ban autonomous weapons. I got 1,000 of my colleagues working in AI and robotics to sign that letter last year, and have found myself, as a result, being invited to talk at the UN on this topic. And on Wednesday, unfortunately, I'm leaving early to go and speak again in Geneva at the UN, where they're reaching a critical point in the discussion about killer robots or lethal autonomous weapons. And again, this is not smart AI. This is stupid AI. This is not an autonomous weapon. This is a remote-controlled drone. But it's a very small technical leap to take the human pilot, the guy sitting or girl sitting in a container back in Nevada, who's flying this thing, who's setting off that Hellfire missile, replace that person with a computer. And the UK's Ministry of Defence, they have a demonstrator to prototype it, and they think it's technically possible to make a completely autonomous version of this today. And I believe them. There's an arms race developing to build such technologies. This is the British aerospace demonstrator I just mentioned, Taranis, that's been flying now for 3 years. It can fly across oceans autonomously, target, and work completely without any humans in the loop. Earlier this year, the US Navy launched their first autonomous ship it can cross the whole of the Pacific completely autonomously with no one on board, hunting for submarines and mines. This is a Russian autonomous tank. This is Boeing's autonomous submersible, size of a bus. I used to say these things are, the sort of things people talk about Terminator. That's 50 years away. But then you see this lineup of robots that came out of a Google company, Boston Dynamics. The guy on the left is a terrifying YouTube video of this guy walking through the snow, being pushed over. You start to think, well, actually, no. Hollywood's actually pretty good at predicting where we will end up if we don't make the right decisions. And that guy is starting to look suspiciously like some of the things that we've seen in the movies. So I do think we should think about limiting AI ourselves. There are a couple of other things I'm not going to have time to talk about because I actually think it's much more useful to have the discussion about the impact it's going to have on jobs. You can't believe the Oxford Martin report that 47% of jobs are under risk. The single-digit precision is misleading, but a significant number of jobs clearly are under risk. As an example, in September this year, Uber started trialing autonomous taxis, which is a great irony because this was the newest job on the planet, being an Uber driver. It will be the shortest-lived job on the planet. Right? Every taxi driver should have woken up and realized, wait a second, there's no way Uber can scale their business like other internet companies unless they get me out of the equation. That's clearly their trajectory. That's clearly, and it's this great economic advantage. But what are those people going to do? And a final topic that I haven't got time really to talk about, which is algorithmic discrimination, which is that we're giving algorithms the right to make decisions that may be discriminating. And I'll just end with one example, which is the Compass program in the United States. This is a nice example of how you can use machine learning. You can train it on data to predict whether violent criminals will reoffend. Now, you could use that for deciding where to spend your limited probationary services. Help those vulnerable people keep out of jail, make society a slightly safer place. That would seem to be a good use of technology. That's not how it's being used. It's being used by judges in 20 of the 52 states in the United States to decide probation terms, to decide bail conditions, and decide when to release people from jail. Now you're probably feeling a little bit, oh, I'm not so sure about that. That sounds a bit more morally suspect. We're letting a program help us make these difficult decisions, probably the most challenging decisions we make as a society, who we should deprive of their liberty. And then there's a sucker punch to this story, which is that the program was shown to be biased against black people. It was more likely, because it was trained on sample data that was biased, it was shown to be more, to predict that black people were more likely to reoffend than they will, and therefore those people are being locked up longer than they should be, and more likely to predict that white people would not reoffend when they will. And so those people were being released perhaps more dangerously into the community. But even if we can get that program to be correct, and if we got over the algorithmic bias of the training data, we could make it a much better predictor. There's this deep philosophical question: should we be giving those sorts of decisions to machines? There are decisions that humans should make, and I believe only humans should make, and that we should not be giving those responsibilities to machines. And I always like to aim, when I talk about these things, about some of the risks and some of the problems and some of the issues here, that at the end of the day, the reason we're doing it is because of all the wonderful benefits. Autonomous cars will save thousands of road deaths. Autonomous cars will transform the economics of transportation. They'll give mobility to the young, to the elderly, the disabled. They'll transform our cities. They'll open up our cities. They will have immense benefits. And there's lots of other examples in healthcare, in many of the other things, many of the other challenges that we face today in terms of the global climate change, the global financial crisis, that we will need the productivity, the gains that technology, in particular AI, will bring if we're going to tackle some of these really challenging problems that face our society in the next 50 years. So we need to develop the technology. Most of what we work on is morally neutral, and we get to choose whether it's used for good or bad. So let's make sure we choose the good path. Thank you very much.
So we have plenty of time for questions. Please just raise your hand very high, and I'll note you down. I'll make eye contact and put down your name, and hopefully we'll get to you. Okay, let's start with Steve.
Thank you. I'm glad to begin. I'll limit myself to one comment. And your arguments about why we don't worry about superintelligence. You made your argument too about anthropomorphism, where you talk about how there's nothing significant about human intelligence, and that's a product of anthropomorphism that we think there is. I agree completely that there is an anthropomorphism that is shaping our view of how AI is developing. But I don't necessarily think that means human level intelligence is not significant. And it may be that the anthropomorphism is a problem in as much as we think the development of the technology is coalescing around something human-like, or might at some point. Now that seems very unlikely, because we don't solve the component parts of intelligence in anything like the way evolution has. What that means is then there might not be a plateau at human-level intelligence, and in all sorts of ways we might overshoot human-level intelligence. Human-level intelligence is nonetheless significant because we know humans are the things capable of developing AI. So we're not interested in attaining dog-level intelligence and then intelligence running away, because we know dogs have no track record of further developing technology that is intelligent. We, however, do. So it's possible that anthropomorphism is leading us to think that technology will stop at a certain plateau when it won't, and it will overtake a point which is significant because it will allow then the further development of this technology.
Right, thanks. Yeah, my argument was that we wouldn't get to superintelligence, that it wouldn't, that it might not necessarily be a runaway trajectory to get there. I actually do believe we will get to superintelligence. We will build it, but I suspect it's going to be more painful to get there than simply passing human level intelligence, and then suddenly that's it, it's game over. We can walk away and just let the machines improve themselves. I think it's going to be much more of a challenge than that. And certainly, if we look at the history of science, people always pick up, well, we were the tool users. That was the thing that was, that used to be one of the arguments. It was something that made us special. We were the only people that, we're the only creature on the planet that learned how to use tools, that amplified our abilities to do things, got over the inadequacies of our bodies, and so on. But increasingly, you open New Scientist and you discover, oh, this bird now uses tools, this ape now uses tools, and so wait a second, it was not tools that makes us special. The fact that we're able to, there are other creatures that have managed to amplify their abilities by using bits of the planet to do other things with. So I don't think there's any inevitability, but it doesn't preclude it, of course.
I'm interested in this topic and going further on that line, because it seems to me that if we do get to human level in whatever the meaningful sense is, then at the moment AI is developing and progressing because humans are doing smart things with their computers, and if you can automate those smart things, then that's exactly a scenario where we would expect we would be able to walk away from the computers. I don't know about overnight, but we would expect perhaps an accelerating process. In general, I was interested, and I like the fact that you laid out the case saying, let's focus on these shorter-term concerns. It seems to me like there's going to be massive challenges that as a society we are going to need to face, but that there's only so far that we can drop the ball. If at the moment Tesla's kill 1 or 2 people, if they were killing thousands and thousands of people, we'd like really wake up and say, we need to solve this. And so it looks like that problem can't get too far out of hand. Whereas if there's some potential, some future catastrophe, even if it's quite low probability, then it looks like it's actually very important to try and be foresighted and try to be conservative and cautious about avoiding it. Do you have thoughts on that?
My feelings about Tesla is this is a litmus test for how we as a society are going to address technological change that's going to happen over the next 20 or 30 years. And my opinion of how we're doing it is very poor at the moment. I'm sure we will work out how to do autonomous cars better and more responsibly than we are today. But I think it's a very poor reflection on our society that if this is what happens with autonomous cars, what's going to happen with all the other technologies we introduce if we just allow the free market to do that? So I was picking on Tesla because I see that as a litmus test for how we move forwards. And then the second part to your question, I'm not dismissing the existential risk that AI may pose. I'm just suggesting that it's not necessarily going to happen overnight, and therefore we will have time, hopefully, to make sure that we do solve all of these issues. And it's not suddenly that we make these programs. We will accelerate. I mean, one of the great things about I try to end on the positive note, saying don't forget all the positive benefits. We will accelerate the progress of science through the AI tools that we have. It is impossible today to read the medical literature, right? And the only thing that's going to be able to read the medical literature and keep up are machines. And so we will be amplified by our machines. The question is whether we get replaced by them or not, more than whether we're amplified. So I'm absolutely convinced that, like technology has in the past amplified our abilities, there is fantastic opportunities to amplify our capabilities with AI and other technologies moving forwards.
So my question just expands a bit on Owen's second question. If you think that an intelligence explosion is, say, in your talk you said it was unlikely or less likely than likely.
Not inevitable, not as inevitable as you read the quotes that people say, human level intelligence will quickly lead to superhuman level intelligence, full stop.
Okay, but my understanding of sort of postulate position is that there's some chance of an intelligence explosion. And that chance might be like, even if you think it's about 1%, then if that's going to have these catastrophic effects, then that suggests you should do something about it. In the same way on the personal level, if you do this, you're going to have a 1% chance of dying, then most people take action, they stop smoking or whatever. It's kind of the same idea really with the AI thing. Not saying that an intelligence explosion is definitely going to happen or it's very likely to happen. Even if you just think there's a 1% chance, then that means that you should put probably significant resources into trying to deal with it.
Well, we're very bad at estimating probabilities. I would hate to put a number on it, but I would certainly struggle. I'm resisting putting a number on it because I know the number I put on it would be significantly less than the number you put on it, I'm sure. Like most things in science, it's very difficult to say something is impossible. Right? And I don't believe it's impossible that there won't be an intelligent explosion. I have listed a number of reasons why obstacles that I would see getting in the way of an intelligent explosion. So what does that tell me? It tells me that I need to understand this issue more. We need to know what the probability is perhaps a little bit better. We would need to know whether any of these obstacles are insurmountable or not. Right? You know, there's some fundamental issues like computational complexity that get in the way, and that may just, you know, fundamentally we will just top out at some point. We are very aware in physics of limits. You can't go faster than the speed of light. You can't observe things with any greater accuracy than the quantum uncertainty allows you to see. So we're used to running into fundamental limits. And so I think it's a very valid question to ask, what are the fundamental, and to expect that there may be some fundamental limits. And to say, you know, what things could stop this process, and understand, you know, whether this would be a runaway problem. Just the same as when they, you know, developed the first nuclear bomb, the calculation was done. I'm trying to desperately remember whether it's Oppenheimer who calculated whether the Earth's atmosphere was going to combust or not, right? Teller calculated whether the Earth's atmosphere was going to, you know, combust by the runaway effect of setting light to the atmosphere, right? Those, you know, are calculations we should do to see whether we will have those runaway effects. But I want people to realize there's no inevitability. There are many arguments to say that it's not a logical necessity that we will get to some intelligence, and there is no reason to suppose that runaway effect won't stop.
Thank you for your great talk. Really interesting. Down here. Really interesting perspective. And I'd like to start to say that I'm really happy that we now seem to, like, everyone in this room, basically everyone is in agreement that it's really important to work on value alignment problem. But still, there seem to be some disagreement that I think is still important to appreciate the scale of the problem. That, well, perhaps there is no logical certainty, but there is indeed a very, very strong argument at the level of a scientific theory for superintelligence following very rapidly after human-level intelligence. And you list 6 points against this, and I would just like to respond to them very quickly. The speed argument is not about reaching the human capability. It's about once you are at the human capability, if you have a bunch of humans thinking much faster, then even though they do not get any new feats of thinking, just doing human thinking at a greater speed would allow you much greater power to act in the world. Human level intelligence quote you make, it is in fact anti-anthropocentric. It talks about how the human level is not special, and so we should expect progress to continue beyond it. And you seem to paint it as some kind of like human level tipping point, which it doesn't say.
Sorry, you have to get to your question quite quickly. We have shooting at you. Sorry, but yeah, do that, that'd be great. There'll be time in the break.
The biggest one is the diminishing returns, which is a very good argument that has come up before. And here we know about physical limits on computation, and we know that we are very, very far away from those. And so we should expect superhuman capabilities just from being able to do those computations faster. We also know that human intelligence in how it implements things like short-term memory is very limited. So ±2 being a very common figure cited, and we are not limited by those limits.
Okay,
So,
well, I'm sure we can have some interesting discussion offline. But just to remember, you know, we already have machines that can do arithmetic far, far faster than us. But, you know, arithmetic didn't improve because we could just run the calculator that much faster. But to go to value alignment, you know, it is a fundamental problem, and I hope people would have seen that in the example I mentioned at the end with the Compass program, we already have that problem today. The machine's values are not aligned with society's. That we're giving the machine the ability to make decisions about locking people up, whose values are not aligned with the ones that we as a society would want. So we're already running into these value alignment problems. And it doesn't require us to get to superhuman level intelligence before we have that problem. We have it today. We have it with autonomous cars. We have problems aligning the values of the machines to the actions that they're allowed to do in the real world today. We don't even have to get to superhuman level intelligence before we have value alignment problems. It's a consequence that we can see today.
The problem might also be that the values of society might not be coherent. Many of the data sets that produce biased behavior are biased because they come from a somewhat racist and sexist and homophobic society. We do not want that when we think carefully, ethically about what values we would like to have as a society. We want our society to be actually also be more value aligned with what we think are better values.
We do.
And that is, of course, the real challenge of both the kind of human and machine value alignment. We actually need it open-ended enough to actually move towards better values.
When the US Justice Department paid money for the Compass program, they made a choice which already showed that they were willing to entrust decisions to machines where the values didn't align with society. So we already have that problem today. It's a fundamental problem, and so it's a deep philosophical problem for the room to think about, which is, what are the values? How do we formalize them? How do they work across countries, across societies? But they're problems I would suggest we already run into today, and they will only get worse as we get more intelligent machines and give them more responsibilities.
So I really kind of buy the stop, do it right message of the second half. And I want to kind of put something that was perhaps hanging in the background of what you were saying, but you didn't say explicitly that might make this look even stronger. And the point comes from a sort of lesson that people who look at history of science commonly say, which is that the development of technology is extremely contingent and path dependent. It's not like, a lot of the time you're talking about what are the sort of limits in principle of us developing these technologies, at least in the first half. But actually, at least historians of science would say when you look at the way that both science and technology progresses, it's hugely contingent. What kind of science you get, what kind of technologies you get. It's not as if there's some inevitable march in any respect towards this. And that means that who's in charge of forming that technology, and in fact what perceptions people have of that technology while they do them, makes an enormous difference to how that technology ends up looking. Right? So, for instance, you list the benefits of developing sort of autonomous private cars. You can imagine someone saying, yeah, but the real cost of that is it encourages us to have our own damn cars. And really we should be having, different types of transport networks, for instance. And so I think if you sort of emphasize the contingency of technological development more so, and then make it clear that actually if we live in a liberal society, we don't want to have particular individuals or particular types of people making decisions about how the technology ends up looking, I think the stop this, do it properly kind of point becomes sort of even stronger.
I couldn't agree better with everything you said. I mean, there's a beautiful, if you haven't come across it, there's a beautiful talk, it's written down by Neil Postman, 5 lessons from technological history, from technological change. And he concludes with the argument that we should always view technology as a strange intruder into our lives. And that, our technologies, most of them are morally neutral. We get to choose whether they get used for good or bad and what uses they get to use. And just as I mentioned with that example with the Compass program, I began with the story of the good use you could have put it used to, and that would seem to make our society a better place, seem to help the most vulnerable people in our society. And there is a bad use, and we've chosen the bad use. And we get to make these choices all the time, and they're only increasing as our machines become more intelligent, and it becomes more critical to make those choices.
All right, we're for time for the Q&A, but please do save your questions for the general discussion for those we did not get to. We did have a lot of questions that as the Q&A went on. And thank you for a wonderful talk. Yeah, let's think.